But let me just start with that little prayer, a little sort of setting ourselves in the right direction. The Tibetans always say, set our motivation. I think we would say, state our purpose. So really, it's very simple. Why are we here together? What's our purpose? Why are we here? What's our goal? So we're here to listen. I'm listening too. I always say that. That's true. To these views of the Buddha about life and indeed death, and the potential of our minds, basically. So we're going to listen to take some tools from it, if we can find any tools that are useful, so that we can develop our amazing potential, which what Buddha talks about. So we can be a benefit. So we are the beneficiary, but then so we can be a benefit to others, because we all live in this world together, you know. So the long-term goal, the best goal, the most altruistic, the most expansive, is this goal of achieving this marvelous potential of Buddhahood, because then we're qualified to help others limitlessly and for as long as necessary. So we think like that. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangsho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chanyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok sangye charang soke chognam la jangsho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chanyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok sangye charang soke chognam la Jangcho Baru Dagni Kyab Suchi, Dagi Chunyen Gi Personam Ki, Drola Penchir Sangi Drupasho. Okay, so why would we talk about death? I suppose if we have a materialist philosophical view, then the reason to think about death is to prepare for it, for what you leave behind, you know, organize your will, organize your coffin, you know, work things out from this world, from the point of view, because from that point of view, there's nothing left. You're gone, you know? So, of course, most people don't like to think about death. Many people in the West say, oh, you know, I hope I die in my sleep so I won't know about it. But the Buddhist view is very, very different. The Christian view, of course, is another view. You want to look forward to death. You want to be ready for death because you want to go to heaven. And that can at least kind of energize you to die well. And that's the Buddhist view as well. So the key thing we have to realize in Buddhism, and this is especially, I mean, the teachings on death in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which are the Vajrayana teachings, are really very extensive, you know. And from the perspective of a person on this path to Buddhahood, then death is a really crucial thing to understand, because according to the Buddha, our mind will continue to another life, and we've got a long-term goal of Buddhahood, which indeed could take us countless lifetimes. So you've got to have a very serious long-term plan, basically, you know. And that's quite literally the way to put it. So death's an extremely important stage in this progress, in this development, you know. So as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, I mean, there's a book of his that I happen to edit, and so I'm familiar with his teachings, called How to Face Death Without Fear. It's published by Wisdom. It's run out of paperbacks. We're working on a reprint, but it's still available as a digital book. As Rinpoche says, actually, if you want to help anybody in this life, the time they need you most is at the time of death. And of course, from the materialist point of view, that's ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's like a completely opposite to reality. As far as we're concerned, you know, death is the end. And really we can see that this view that death is the end, what do you mean help them at the time of death? It has no meaning. We can see that I think, frankly, in more and more in the view in our world that is enabling people to kill themselves, or, you know, allowing us to kill other people. I mean, we don't like to put it so bluntly, that effectively is what it is, you know, because we don't, you know, and the reason is because we see the suffering, or we don't want it. We don't want the suffering we might anticipate. So we want permission to be able to, you know, legally now to kill ourselves, isn't it? And it's very, yeah. So from the Buddhist point of view, that's really not the point at all, you know. The whole idea is to live out, first of all, there's two approaches to preparing for death. One is to live your life well, so that when death comes, you're ready for it and relaxed. And the second one is what to do at that time, or the weeks and months before. This is the way the book approaches it in a chronological order, the weeks and months before death, the weeks before death, the days before death, the hours before death, at the time the breath stops, and then indeed 3 days, so 3 days after that, which according to this view, the Vajrayana view, the mind is still there, and then the days after death. So it's a whole process, And why it is so important for a person to help a person die well, and we'll describe that exactly what that means, is because at the time of death is when the karmic seed planted in the mind of that person. And this is why to understand karma is so important. The seed in the mind of that person that will determine their next life. Because we ourselves create our own future lives. There's no concept of a creator running the show. Therefore, there's no concept of a punisher or rewarder. And nor is it a random event, So the seed that will determine your next life is triggered as this death process starts. And it's described in great detail, as I said, in the Vajrayana teachings. And indeed, anybody who's got a Tibetan Buddhist practice from the Vajrayana knows well that, the sadhana of the deity practices are constructed in such a way that we incorporate, we bring into our practice the meditation on these 8 stages of death that are described so that we can be ready for it when it comes, So it's quite a big deal. But I think before that, the crucial piece, the crucial one, without this, we won't be able to be ready for death, no matter how many people are helping us. The crucial one is how to live our lives, So to see death in the framework of how to live your life. And that means we have to understand Buddha's view about karma, Buddha's view about ethics, and Buddha's view of the mind, which are the very first stages of practice, in anybody who's practicing as a Buddhist, whether you're in Burma, Thailand, or in Tibet. The teachings, the really basic nuts and bolts teachings of the Buddhas about karma and about how the mind works. These are crucial to understand. Then we'll understand. Then death fits into that picture perfectly, But I think as an aside, I find it very moving, actually. I've noticed over the years more and more people in the medical profession in our modern world are actually even electing to work in the hospice movement. There's a really strong wish to want to make the situation better for families, have less fear around death, to enable people to die peacefully, whether or not you have a view of future lives or of heaven or whatever, which is really nice. I remember in Australia, I was at a conference, and many of these about death, people wanting to learn about the different religions' views about death. So it's nurses and doctors and medical professionals electing to work in this area, which is very moving, actually. I remember one hospital in Sydney, it was very moving. This doctor, it was a children's hospital. So, of course, the kind of death we can't bear, isn't it, is the death of children, because it feels so shocking to us, in general, we don't like death. We somehow think death is a mistake. And if you die young, especially 2 or 3 or 5 or 7, this seems to be the most shocking thing that's very hard to deal with. So it's kept very hidden, and there's so much fear around it. Well, this very kind doctor, he held a conference, and I participated. I was invited to give a talk, the Buddhist view about death. And his main concern was to help the families, not be so full of shame and guilt and grief, to really confront it and look at it. And the hospital, he was so sweet. The morgue in the hospital for the little dead babies and dead young children, he decorated them like a nursery, and they were open, so families could go in and out. And the children were trained to understand what a morgue is. And one little boy said, "Come and meet my dead brother." So moving, so nice that it make it more open, because we can see there's so much fear around death. So let's look at that from the Buddhist perspective. His analysis, before we get to karma or the mind even, and we look at Buddha's analysis about his very first teaching was actually the teaching about impermanence, that everything changes. This seems hardly like a rocket science teaching. Yeah, okay, Buddha, we know that. But one of his key teachings actually is on this. One of the first levels of teachings is to look into this reality that in fact things are impermanent. We are impermanent. Lives are impermanent. You know, houses are impermanent. Relationships are impermanent. Beautiful things, bad things. And even to look at this, the amount of fear that's around death is very much related to just that. That we have this very powerful view deep in our bones. No one taught us. We came programmed with it from the Buddhist perspective. It's a deep mistaken view deep in our mind that clings to ourselves and things as unchanging. I mean, intellectually, we know it's not true. We would never even admit to thinking that things are permanent. But if we look into this and look into our lives, look into our viewpoints and our incredible fear of change, and that's pretty evident, you know. And you can see this in ordinary daily life activities. And to understand this, we also have to understand attachment, which means to understand the mind. Because as Lama Zopa says, actually, the main cause of fear at the time of death, he doesn't even say it's grasping at permanence. It's because of attachment. This intense, so we have this intense, this one of the deepest states of mind that Buddha would suggest is the cause of our suffering in daily life. Is this primordial state of mind that he labels attachment. You know, he says it's in the Four Noble Truths, effectively he says attachment is the main cause of our suffering, which of course I always say it, and it's true in our ordinary world, in our views of psychology. This is an absurd idea. Who's heard of attachment being the cause of your suffering? Nobody, you know. We think it's the outside world that's causing my suffering, or getting old that's causing my suffering, or my husband or my children or the world, you know. We never think my mind is the cause of my suffering, or indeed the cause of my happiness. But this is a fundamental point in Buddhism, you know. His whole analysis of suffering and happiness is rooted in his view of the mind and indeed in his view of karma. So as far as he's concerned, let's look at the mind first. This mind of ours, we have these categories of mind, categories of states of mind that are neurotic, I-based, fear-based, delusional, distressing, depressing, you know, really deeply suffering. They call them, they refer to them in Buddhist, in the Sanskrit and the Tibetan as afflictions, you know, mental afflictions, which is a term we might not use, but I think we're very familiar with them. They're called attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, low self-esteem, these very ordinary sounding states of mind that we don't even really consider much in psychology. We have all these fancy terms for our psychological problems, you know, but these are what Buddha would call mental illnesses. These are his view of what mental illness is. And it's a question of degree, that's all, you know. So learning to understand our mind, seeing these neurotic states of mind and beginning to identify them and change them. This is the job of being a Buddhist, actually, being your own therapist, as Lama Zopa puts it, you know. So the other states of mind, which are, I would say, are our saving grace. We know these well too, the virtues, the goodness, the clear states of mind, the kindness, the love, the compassion, the generosity, the forgiveness. And the key point that Buddha's making, and this is what we need to learn to identify if we try to take a Buddhist practice, is to see the suffering characteristic of the unhappy ones, to try and see that, you know, instead of being completely addicted to believing, yes, I'm angry, I know I am, and it's horrible, but he is the cause. So we focus on the external trigger of the anger as being the problem. The Buddha says we need to focus on the anger itself, the attachment itself, the jealousy itself. This is key. This is his expertise, actually. So he's basically saying, in a broad way, basically what Buddha's saying is, the broadest point he's making is that these neurotic states of mind, these deluded states of mind, delusional, distressing, unhappy states of mind, which we consider very natural, and he agrees they are natural, but we think they're so natural that you'd be unnatural if you didn't have them, you know. But his findings from his own direct experience, you know, is that they can be lessened, identified, lessened, and eventually removed. And that's what he literally means by nirvana. When you've removed these neuroses from your mind, which is Buddha's unique approach to life, it's not how we think in modern world. It's not how we think in neuroscience. There's no view equivalent to that, which is why we think of it religion, but Buddha's all about the mind. These are the source of all our pain, and we can remove them, and that's what liberation is. That's what nirvana means, you know. Like we can even go more by adding bodhicitta, we can actually become a Buddha. But his deal, his view, his expertise is about the mind and how to completely reconfigure it, totally, radically change our mind into the mind of an enlightened being. So if that's the view we're taking, then it's evident we need to identify these states of mind, which is not an easy job because they come along like in a big soup with all the good ones, you know. We can't see the difference. We completely even conflate, like, for example, love and attachment, we think virtually they're the same states of mind. But from the Buddhist perspective, they're utterly different. And it's not an easy job to identify them. This is why it's so important for us who try to practice the Buddhist path is to study this stuff. I mean, there's incredibly in-depth literature on this, and Buddha didn't come up with much of this stuff. This comes from these Hindus before him, you know. He went further, and the Buddhist, it's the key central part of the Buddhist view. But these genius Indians before him, you know, were the ones, as His Holiness says, came up. They're the ones who first began the investigation into the nature of self. They're the ones who created this technique that's called the developing of samadhi, single-pointed concentration. These genius Indians, you know, well before the Buddha. So it's an incredibly, actually sophisticated, incredibly detailed, sophisticated view of the mind, but not the brain. The internal, subjective, cognitive process itself. This is the Buddha's view. This is the Buddha's deal, you know. So, okay. So the states of mind that are causing us suffering, tremendous suffering in this life, and therefore at the time of death, unable to deal with it, even think about it, is because of these emotional afflictions like attachment, aversion, and so on and so forth. But this other one, these are series of states of mind in the mind that Buddha would talk about that have emotional impact, but they're like philosophical viewpoints even. So one is this grasping at things as permanent. I mean, this is a view actually of the previous Indians, the previous Hindus, that they state there is a permanent, inherent, permanent, unchanging, essential me in there. They call it a self. The Christians call it a soul. You know, the Greeks call it an essence. The Buddha would argue there's no such one. Doesn't mean there's no self or no I. There is, but there's the way that it exists. So this is a massive part of Buddha's teachings. So beginning to realize the impermanence of that I, and indeed impermanence of my life and my computer and everything else, is a crucial part of Buddhist practice. So it's coming to terms with death means coming to terms with the reality of change, you know. So by thinking about recognizing change in your daily life, in yourself and your relationships and everything else, it prepares you for death, you know, because you realize that things are changing. But there are many approaches, certainly in the Tibetan Buddhist teachings, about how to approach this business of death, how to recognize that, you know, as Lama Zopa talks, in fact, if you've studied the Lam Rim, this particular approach that all the Tibetans take, but they call it something different, but we Gelugpas call it the Lam Rim, this presentation of the stages of the path. The very first point, right at the beginning, entries level junior school, grade 1, Atisha, his text that uses the basis, he talks about we need to realize impermanence, but he takes particularly the impermanence of death. Not, you know, the teachings on impermanence are very fascinating, actually. And even the teachings on, they have gross impermanence, which is you know, things break, people die, but there's another level of impermanence they call subtle impermanence, which is really fascinating. And you can even confuse it with emptiness, you know. So he doesn't talk about that one. He wants to give us, his agenda is to give us a wake-up call to not want to waste our lives. So he gets us to think about the impermanence of this person. So he mentions 3 points, you know, and the thing is, he uses these as a basis for a kind of a contemplative meditation, to think about the reality, this reality, become familiar with it, become used to it, and therefore slowly change your approach to life. So the very first one is that death is definite. So that's evident to anybody. We can see that. We don't want to go into it. We don't want to look at it. So how do you do that? Well, you bring this in. You can do it on your meditation cushion, but you do it in your daily life. You know, because we're so bombarded by the world now with all our different social media and our computers and iPads and iPhones and televisions, we're seeing it all the time. And every second of the day, you're going to hear about or see people, animals, creatures, bugs dying. We just take it for granted. When they get to the only time it makes any, the only time. Well, I mean, we see so much of it. It can be very overwhelming if it's like wars and dramas and things, you know, and we just get freaked out. But the only time death really starts to get close to us is if our loved ones die, isn't it? Our pet, our mother, our beloved. And then we start to freak out and really think about it. It moves us, but we still don't get the point, you know. And the real point is there's this kind of famous one Gelugpa Lama from the early 20th century wrote a text about, it's like a very direct experiential thing where you're talking to yourself really, and it's going through the stages of death and so on and so forth. And he talks, the last line in each verse is, this will happen to me. And that's the way to make it a wake-up call. You can have such compassion if your loved one dies. You can be grief-stricken, but until you say, this will happen to me, you won't think about death. because we're just seeing it as something sad, it won't be a wake-up call. We need to make it a wake-up call for ourselves. And that's the clear point. If we can do that, we'll trust. I mean, already the Lamas say, if we can begin to even realize a little bit how impermanence is reality, we'll change our lives. Meaning we won't get so caught up in all the dramas. If you know you could die, the second point is the time of death is uncertain. That's evident. If you can really realize that one, and that's the real shock to our system. Because we know we will die. We assume it's a long way away. That even if you're old, I promise, I mean, I'm old now, and I still have the same feeling wise, not intellectual, but feeling wise, that if we try to get to see how we have this feeling of being permanent, we don't analyze it, but it's a feeling. We call it a living person. As Lama Zopa says, the world is full of living people and dying people. And this is how it is, isn't it? I'm a living person. And my friend Kath in France just heard she had to go to hospital again to get more treatment for her cancer. So she thinks of herself as a dying person. And when we hear that, we don't want to know. It's a horrible concept. You think about that. Who is a dying person? They're not even a real person, because you don't know what to talk to them about. Oh, poor Mary, she's dying, we'll say. You got to smile sadly at them and you want to get the hell out of their way. Who wants to talk to a dying person? This is how strong our misconceptions are, because we know the second point, the time of death is uncertain. I mean, it's so evident every day we can prove the truth of this, but we just don't want to know about it, It feels like an accident, And we really don't know how to deal with a dying person. But as Lama Zopa says, and it's so obvious, such a cliche, but so obvious, we are all literally dying people. The only difference is I don't know when. I mean, my friend Kimberly in hospital in Canada, she's got a couple of months. She's totally aware of it. She speaks in terms of that. That's how she talks, She's got this sense of a short life left. But even then, I mean, one of my friends on death row in Kentucky, they're really definitely, if you want to call it, dying people with a date, some of them with a date. There's my friend Frank, one of the guys on death row, preparing to how to deal with death. And then he suddenly dies of leukemia, big shock. So even your death date isn't certain. I remember a friend in Los Angeles went there to help his father die of cancer. And he got better. That literally had a party to celebrate. Next day, his daddy died of a heart attack, So even your death date is not certain. So we have these strong concepts. But the trouble is, because they're so ingrained in us, we don't learn them from our mother. And this is the Buddha's view. All these misconceptions, all these delusions are so deeply ingrained from, he would say, countless lifetimes of believing them, of thinking them, to the point where they just become natural. And that's why it's hard to dig them up, because we take them as an assumption, So to really shift these assumptions takes time. And the third point from the Buddhist perspective that Atisha mentions is, at the time of death, when it does come, at that moment, what is important? And this is really showing very clearly the Buddhist view, Well, the first point, given that my consciousness, my mind, did not come from a creator, did not come from mother and father, did not begin at conception, but came from previous lifetimes. This is a fundamental given in Buddha's teachings, given that everything I think and do and say, and this is the view of karma, programs my mind, sows seeds in my mind that will ripen in the future as the person I become and my experiences and so on. Given a next level of detail, that every action of body, speech, and mind, which is labeled negative, which is an action broadly, a negative action broadly, the most intense kind of negative action is one that is done with my body or speech on the basis of anger or attachment or jealousy or one of the negative states that harms another, or any other one that's a negative state of mind, whatever. These negative states of mind just naturally program my mind. Everything I think sows seeds in my mind that will ripen in the future unless you pull them out. So given that negative seeds ripen as my future suffering, which I do not want, and given that my positive actions, an action based on a positive state of mind, love, compassion, forgiveness, kindness, non-attachment, non-anger, that benefits another, given that those seeds will ripen as my happiness. This is a simple concept. It's not complicated, just that it's not how we think. In other words, we produce ourselves. We are our own creator. As His Holiness says, karma is like self-creation. And this, even though it's a simple concept, continuity of consciousness, everything you think and do and say programs you, it's not complicated intellectually, but it's so shockingly different, from how we think. If you're a Christian or a Muslim, or indeed a philosophical materialist, So given these, then it follows logically that at the time of death, at the time the death process starts, we'll describe it from this Vajrayana perspective, it's a given then that at the time of death, the only seeds I need to be there, ready to be triggered, thank you very much, are the virtuous ones. That's the Buddha's idea. So that already that would inform your entire life. In other words, that's the basis for good ethics in Buddhism. The very first level of good ethics in Buddhism is, and this is a crucial point to get, the point of ethics is because that produces you. You are the beneficiary of your good ethics. The general idea we have is it's good to be ethical. It's good to behave nicely because, it's just you become a better person. You can, you don't harm others. People don't like being killed or lied or stolen from, which is absolutely true. It's natural law for the Buddha. But the real reason, right at the beginning, he exhorts us to behave well, not kill, not steal, not lie, live in vows, practice every day, purify your body, speech, and mind. The main reason at the beginning is to get what he calls renunciation, which means the wish to give up suffering because you are fed up with suffering. So really the first level of practice, you are the beneficiary of it. The reason he exhorts us not to kill and steal and lie is because that programs us with suffering. And then eventually, as we have compassion, of course, we'll also not steal, kill, and lie out of compassion for others. But the first reason is out of kind of, you could say, the way we say it in the West, compassion for yourself. And that's a hard one for us in our culture. We don't hear it like that. And I think also because we're very used to hearing it in terms of being a Christian or a Muslim. So I was brought up a Catholic. And for Christians, that's the exact point. Good ethics is because God said. That's the key thing that determines why an action is not a sin. A sin, by definition for Christians, is doing something that God said not to do. And that's the view, I think, the dualistic view we have of punishment and reward. Oh, I'm a naughty girl, I'll get punished. It's very instinctive in us. There's no view like that in Buddhism. There's no one out there punishing you. There's no punisher. There's no rewarder. So to really internalize it in this way for your own benefit, that you are the beneficiary of your actions. You receive the results of your negative actions and you receive the results of your positive actions. And as far as Buddha is concerned, that's a natural law. This takes us time to think about it. We hear about it, karma, oh yeah, but we don't really like it much, But it's hugely important. It's central to the Buddhist view of the universe, to the Buddhist view of happiness and suffering, to the Buddhist view of what's real and what's not, This is the very first level. So living your life ethically, being driven by this wish not to harm yourself now or in the future is the very first level of practice. And already you become a happier person, a more relaxed person, a more kind person, and then having this strong feeling of impermanence, knowing, as Lama Zopa says, it's best to think I will die today. I mean, we can say that 1,000 times. I say it to myself many, many times. And I tell you, I do not believe it. But you've got to practice, don't you? It takes time. And the only reason to do that is not to become more fearful, which is how we do hear it. No, on the contrary, it's to wake up and stop being fearful. Because we're living in fear of death, we live in denial of it because we don't know how to think. We don't know what to think, and we just don't want to know about it. So to really have this feeling that you're an impermanent person, to change that deep instinctive feeling of being a solid lump of unchanging me plodding through life. Even though every day we look in the mirror, we can see the changes right there. We still want to know about it. We still don't know. As I said, I really do feel, here I am old, the feeling I have of me from this perspective is the same as I had 30 years ago. Well, evidently I'm 30 years closer to death, isn't it? It's really obvious, but we don't like to think about it. Or I like to use a really good analogy I find very helpful in my mind. The feeling of impermanence is very vivid if you go somewhere. I mean, I walk, I live 20 minutes away walking. So I walk, So I know the route well. I take a couple of routes, so I know the route well. So there's this feeling, isn't there? As I left my home, 81 Bedford Street, went down, got to 7th Avenue, got to 12th Street, crossed over, went to 6th Avenue, saw 13th Street, saw 14th Street. There's a vivid feeling, isn't there, getting closer to the goal. As I was going, I got a sense of how long 20 minutes takes. I checked my clock to make sure I'm on time. And as I'm getting closer, there's a feeling of the goal coming up any minute, isn't there? Do you see my point? Hello, sit down. So there's a vivid feeling of moving towards that goal, isn't it? We know about that. We know that very, very well. We live our lives like this. We have a sense of how long a day takes. We have a sense of how long things take. You're driving, a strong sense of time. We live in that life. We live like that. So we have this very vivid feeling of things moving, changing. The day changes. You see, in the morning, the sun comes up on the east. In the evening, as well, it's dark, put my curtains over. You feel it moving. And that's a kind of good example. We can see that. We're moving towards the evening, moving towards the goal, moving towards sleep, getting up again. So that's the idea we should have about death. I mean, it's just a nice, cute cliche, a cute example, but it works, you know. But whereas look how we feel. Like I said, I feel the same kind of person. I know I'm older. I look in the mirror, but the feeling of Robina is just as I had 30 years ago, 20 years ago, you know, the same, different dramas, different people, but that feeling of permanent me, like this whole me, unchanging, you know, it's very close. We all know it very well. So we know that feeling, but it's a fantasy. So we've got to shift it, move it. And so the real benefit they talk about in the Buddhist teachings, and this is a teacher's agenda, why death comes first, is to give us a wake-up call. Because when you know that, then one of the earlier contemplations you get us to do is the preciousness of this life. And that we don't even have. We don't think our life is precious. All we do is see the mistakes and the problems, and it's miserable, you know, and the dramas. But if we can see the advantages of some of the things we have in this life, then the next one is to think about how death will come. So you don't want to waste this life. That's the real agenda, not to waste this life, given that you've only got a few years left, you know. So what does waste this life means? It means it's completely rooted in this view of karma, in the view of ethics, that you want to put as many positive seeds into your mind. You want to put as many positive seeds into your mind because you're going to be living another life and you'll be prepared for it, baby. Now, we understand preparing for things. We understand gardens. We know you can't just sit there and look at your garden and hope one day something will come. You've got to sow seeds. And because gardens take time, it's a really good example. So you visualize what the kind of garden you want, and you know it's going to be a few months and a few years, but you imagine it and you know you must act now, then your garden will come. We know about saving money. We know about our health. We know about preparing for the future. We're really into that in the West. We understand it, but we don't understand the future of another life, of course. But it's exactly the same approach. Not neurotic. It doesn't have to be attachment. It's just common sense. If you want a beautiful garden and you visualize your beautiful garden in 20 years, you know exactly what you need to do. And you'd be really miserable if you didn't take opportunity to put the right seeds in to nourish them. That's exactly the view with karma, you know. But again, that takes time. It's not the view we have. That takes time. But it will completely change our lives. The Lama say, if we really begun to realize impermanence and then understand basic principles of karma and ethics, your life will be transformed already. You know, you'll be much more easygoing. You'll have less fear, less grasping. You won't be so angry. You won't be so attached. You think, what's the point? It's a ridiculous waste of time, you know, complaining and moaning and going on about things. You'll have much more sense of a dynamic sense of moving, growing, changing. It's crucial. It's really obvious. We understand it. But you've got to do the work. You can't just say it, read a book, and then close it. You've got to think it. Because it's the thinking that changes us, isn't it? Buddhist is your best cognitive therapist, I tell you. So if you live your life in that's the way to live your life as a Buddhist, in the framework of ethics. Sow the seeds in your mind, produce a better person. And then, of course, you add compassion for others to the mix. Well, that's part of it, because you're the beneficiary of that too. That's the way to live your life. And it's kind of common sense. I mean, even if you don't think of future lives. I mean, one of my sisters, Julie, we always joke about it. We brought up in the same family, the same Catholic mother, you know. We had a different approach because our minds are different. Julie she jokes, never thought once about where we come from. Is there a creator? Isn't there a creator? Reincarnation or not? She has not the slightest interest, but she's got a really good ethical life and makes the most of her life. She's got some enthusiasm and sees the benefit of being a moral good person. Of course, this is how the Dalai Lama talks all the time about. He calls it secular ethics, which is fundamental, clearly. So ethics is the fundamental point in the Buddhist perspective, but it's this longer term view as well, you know. And so to prepare. So then the point about dying well from the Buddhist perspective means dying peacefully. And why peacefully is very curious. To understand that, as opposed to being freaked out, Why that's so important? That tells us, when we understand the Buddhist view of the mind, the delusions, the neuroses, the afflictions, that they're intensely fear-based. They are fear-based in their nature. Because basically Buddha says where these states of mind are believing in things that don't exist. The I, the deepest delusion of all, this ego grasping, this maripa, this primordial self-grasping, this primordial ignorance, that okay, right. This primordial ignorance that grasps at a permanent, solid, inherent me, it's based in fear. When Buddha talks about the fears of samsara, sounds kind of quaint. Samsara for the Buddha, being in samsara means literally being caught up in these neurotic states of mind, grasping at permanence, no karma, attachment, anger, all the neuroses, blaming other people, which brings all the anxiety, the depression, and the fears of our lives and causes us to harm others, and having no view of karma. So they're based in fear. All these delusions are based in fear. It's kind of curious to think this way. We know we have panic attacks and anxiety. That's what we call fear. But if you see a person who's angry, they're rooted in fear. They're completely having a panic attack, So these neurotic states of mind are clearly fear-based, and they're totally I-based, and they blind us. They kind of got delusional stories that our mind tells that enable us that cause us not to be able to see reality, to see clearly what's going on. So these are the crucially unhappy states of mind, the unhappy states of mind that we so necessarily must understand and then lessen, so that when you practice lessening them throughout your life, living in the understanding of impermanence, death won't be a surprise, so there won't be fear. Then you'll die very peacefully, very virtuously, even on your own. Most of us need someone to help us, actually, because it's very, it's extremely, and they even talk about in the 12 links of dependent arising, how at the time of death, very strong fear just naturally arises. Even extra fear naturally arises, because of the habit of grasping at ourselves. So to have a person, one of the most precious jobs, he says, at the time of death, to have a person to help navigate this death. Your pets as well. Pets have this instinctive fear of it too, I mean, Buddha would say we've had countless lifetimes and we've died countless times. So it's deeply ingrained in us. So to help your pets die peacefully, help your beloveds die peacefully is the most precious gift you can give. And of course, learning how to do this, because the book is framed in terms of helping others be ready for death, you're helping yourself be ready for death, So it's changing your conceptions, basically, changing your viewpoints. This is how you prepare. And then the time of death. So before we go on, is there any questions about that so far? That's the view of simply speaking, how to live your life in the framework of impermanence to be prepared for death. Is there any questions about that?
Did the Buddha talk about the state of living nirvana and describe what that is? I think you touched on it, but what is the...
How do you mean? I understand, but how do you mean living nirvana? I don't understand that concept. What do you mean?
Like the feeling within inside oneself. Is it the acts of kindness and goodness, or is it a feeling, or is it a...
Which one? Which one? What? I need you to ask the question in another way. I don't understand it. Please say it another way. Spell it out. You mentioned the word nirvana.
Yeah.
So what do you mean when you say that?
That's what my question is.
What is nirvana?
What is...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What is nirvana?
Yeah.
That's your question. Okay, very simple. Thank you. Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay. It's a term used to refer to your mind when you have done all this work of lessening the neuroses over life after life, lessening the neuroses, eventually through meditation, ridding your mind totally of them, and liberating yourself from the whole process of being reborn and suffering and karma. When you've done that job, you have achieved your nirvana. It's a goal. It's a state of mind when your mind is utterly free of all the neuroses and all the rubbish and all the ego. When you've done that, you have achieved your nirvana and you will no longer need to be reborn. That's what literally it refers to. You with me? Yeah, you with me? Hang on. You with me?
Yes.
To hear? Okay, good. Great.
Thank you. I guess two questions. Perhaps related. First, death. It's a lot presupposed when you're talking about it. Help me to think this through, because what is it that we're actually fearing? Death isn't an event, it's not a thing, it's actually not even an experience. I've never had it. And like you said, we only experience the death of another, whatever that might be, loss of some sort, and however it gets.
So you mean, why are we afraid of it? That's what you're asking?
What is it? And
death is the
essentially.
Oh, okay.
What is the fear of this thing called death? And presumably, since everything's impermanent, even the experience of death is impermanent, and therefore, presumptively, the fear is based in some attachment to.
Well, that's what I just said before, very briefly. That why we have so much fear about death is because we have a very strong, this is a Buddhist view, a very strong, deeply instinctive, huge grasping at a very rigid, concrete, permanent, inherent, set in stone feeling of me. Right. So the idea of not being me, basically, is what horrifies us. We can't bear the thought. That's essentially that.
Why do you think after 30 years of practice you still have this?
Because this delusion, I know, the sense of me, no, because the Buddha is suggesting it's countless lifetimes old. The habit is incredibly deep, and you chip away at it. But to really realize impermanence, forget about realizing nirvana, is a pretty intense, profoundly deep realization that has to come, that takes time.
So what hope do we have? You've been practicing 30 years, and you said you still feel this me. That's
it shows that these delusions are deep. It just shows they're deeply, that's the Buddha's view. We come into this life programmed with these deeply, primordially instinctive viewpoints, essentially as assumption. He says it's countless lifetimes old. That's all. And so that the depth of the habit is so strong. And so the only way we can learn eventually, long term, we need to eventually get to the point where we achieve this state of mind that's called samadhi, which is a very subtle state of concentration that these Indians invented, this meditation technique, because then we can access more subtle, more powerful, more capable levels of mind that are able to do the work and absolutely, rid the mind of this rubbish. We've got to start where we are, which is conceptual. Do you understand my point? Yeah. Yes, this lady. Yes, please talk. Yes, sweetheart.
I have a question about dying.
Yes.
About what is defined the timing of your death? Like you're saying there's all these things happening and you don't believe or whatever, all these things. But do you have any control about saying, I don't want to die now, maybe in a week, but not now?
I understand.
And the question is because I'm in that case. I'm in that situation.
You're dying, you mean?
Yeah.
You're sick.
And I have a week, the most 2 months.
Okay.
It's very interesting to me because all my life I studied Buddhism. I've been in monastery. And I have been studying. And now that I'm there, I found it extremely interesting because you're at a totally different level. And
so the question is?
My question is, how much control do you have?
Well, I think it's a fairly, it doesn't, do you not think by looking at life, talking to people, that we don't seem to, unless you're, the Buddhist view would say if you're a very advanced practitioner, yes, you have control. But until we get to those levels of realizations of understanding impermanence, understanding emptiness, understanding bodhicitta, having very powerful states of mind, until then, it's the result of, we're in the process of karma. In other words, the whole point about death, the way the Buddhist approach to it, is this view of karma, which you need to understand.
So many different levels. When you study Buddhism,
I know that. So, but why is that a problem?
Where you think that way.
So, what's your problem about that? Why you have a problem with that? Why do you have a problem with that? Well, you just said it. You said, but.
Yeah, but I don't have that.
Okay, good. Let me explain to you, darling, the Buddhist explanation of what determines the length of our life. Shall I tell you that? From the Buddhist perspective, shall I tell you that?
Speak too fast for me, I'm sorry.
What would you like me to do then? How can I help you?
I'm not asking
Yes, you are. You're asking me to speak slowly. All right,
Share something.
I know, darling. I know it's very, thank you so much. Exactly, darling. I understand.
Speaks more, maybe the most.
I understand, darling.
I know this. I know this.
Well, that's good. I'm very happy for you.
Wondering,
Yes.
is this, what is that? You see, all my teacher died. I had tremendous teachers, amazing teachers, the most amazing, beautiful teachers.
Okay.
And they all died. And
That's right. So what's your actual question then? And I'll try and answer it. Give me your one question, sweetheart, and I'll try and answer it.
My question is,
Yes. I think until you're an advanced practitioner who is clairvoyant and highly realized, you don't have much control at all.
okay, I want to explain my situation.
Don't need to hear it unless you want to, unless you need us to hear it. You'd like us to hear it, would you? You'd like us to hear your situation, would you?
No, because it's so interesting.
I gave you the answer. There's very little control, I would say, sweetheart.
What I'm saying is that I'm there.
And what, darling?
There.
I hear that. I know.
3 times where I was ready,
I understand.
but I didn't do it because there were a situation where I could not allow it to happen.
I see. Good. Well, that's good. Okay.
You have a certain-
Well, that's good. Then I'm very happy for you. So please keep practicing.
But I've been
So
there.
good then. Now, please keep practicing. I'm rejoiced in your ability to do that. That's excellent. I rejoice for you. That's marvelous.
Okay.
Does someone else have a question for me? Anybody on Zoom have a question? No.
I have a question, Robina. I have a question.
Yes. Who is I?
It's Eileen. I have a
Go,
question.
Irene, talk to me, darling.
Yes, you were just about to say something. I'd like to hear it. That what does determine when death comes, or is it that it's individual? That's one's karma. Obviously, some people die at 30, other people live till they're 90. So you were just about to
I'll answer you, darling.
please.
I'll answer you.
Thank
you so much. Now, this is where we have to understand. So just the gentleman had another question. Go on. Yes, go. What's your question, my dear?
I'm glad this conversation is happening because I did have a question while you're speaking. You said karma is self-created, and I started thinking about the dependent co-origination and the interbeing of all of this. And I started to answer this woman's question about what can one do about this. A friend's nephew was had open heart surgery, heart stopped.
Yes.
He worked on it. Started back up. He's now in the hospital 6 days later. Miracle. I didn't think he was this right. But a bunch of Tibetan nuns praying on his behalf, doing 21 times.
Yes. Yes.
Medicine Buddha.
Yes.
Not sure did anything. I'm not a materialist, and yet there's something about prayer and blessing that these women were doing that
Yes.
various satsangs that have
I understand.
doing.
I understand.
So my question is, this woman's point.
Yes.
I'd love to pray for you, by the way, what that's worth.
Go on.
Sure. And I do agree.
No, I mean, the point there I'm making, okay. I want to talk about karma first, which is the basic explanation of why we have happiness, why we have suffering. If we live 27 years or 97 years, why we get sick, why we're healthy, why anything, the Buddha's view is karma. So I want to explain that briefly first. And then, of course, there's things, all we can do, when you understand the point about karma being like your petrol tank, okay? So let's discuss it, okay? So basically, the fundamental law in Buddhism that runs the universe, this natural law, as far as Buddha is concerned, it's a natural law. No one made it up. No one runs it. He has observed it. These Indians before him observed it. This law of cause and effect, such that every millisecond of what anyone thinks or does or says sows seeds in their mind that will stay in that mind, and then based on conditions when they will eventually ripen as our experiences. This is the simple principle that for the Buddha is the law that runs the universe. Okay, so you either have action. So if we look into our lives, we can see we have suffering experiences. Speaking simply, we have suffering experiences and we have happy experiences. If you think about it, We have positive states of mind, negative states of mind. So basically, there are 4 ways in which at this moment, our karma from the past is ripening. And then every millisecond of what we think and do and say is sowing more seeds that will produce our future. So really, it is like, as His Holiness says, self-creation, which is a big shock to us. So it's a very, it's a mental process. So basically, there are 4 ways in which at this moment, our past seeds, our past actions are ripening. One is our type of rebirth. So here we are all called human. So at the time of our human, at the time of conception, at the time of our past death, not more than a few weeks before our mind died and found its way to our present mother's fallopian tube, basically, a few weeks between, we started the death process. We could have been a dog, we could have been a human. So we start this deconstruction process of death, which I wanted to describe. Whether we have time or not, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Okay. So what happened is we began the death process. So at the certain period before we stopped breathing, one of our past virtuous karmic seeds of non-killing, very specifically, non-killing was triggered already before we even stopped breathing. That programmed us. What's your name? The gentleman? What's your name? David. So David, whatever past life he was, then that virtuous karmic seed, which was a virtuous seed of non-killing, was triggered. As you went through the process, at the same time, the next group of karmic seeds, there's 4 ways, I like to think of 4 bank vaults of karmic seeds. The next lot that were triggered at that point were all the karmic seeds that would produce your personality, your tendencies, your mental states, your love, your kindness, your being good at football, good at music, all your propensities, your habits. These do not come from your parents. These are already being triggered, and they're a bunch of your habits from your past practice. Do you understand? They're already triggered in that past life. The third grouping of karmic seeds are called experiences similar to the cause, which is the way you're seen and treated by the people in this life. The people you see, who meet you, the animals who harm you, the humans who are kind to you. We're very social beings, aren't we? All those seeds, they're called experiences similar to the cause, and they're a bunch of seeds that you planted from doing actions like those that happen to you. And the fourth one even is called environmental karma. So it's all explained in more depth in the teachings, although that sounds a bit esoteric. So the type of body you've got, human, the tendencies, your mental tendencies, your experiences, and even the way the physical world impacts upon you. So use one example of non-killing. Okay, so if the non-killing was the first one that got you the human birth, but let's say you've also got, as a result of non-killing, you're born in this life with no tendency to kill. And some humans have that. Most of us might decide later not to kill, but we're usually brought up to kill. We kill the ants, we kill the cockroaches. You understand? People have a very strong tendency to kill. But let's say you have a no tendency to kill. That's from having lived in vows of non-killing in the past. The third experience similar to the cause of non-killing is that you won't die young and you won't get killed. So then the fourth one, the karmic result, the environmental result of non-killing is that you have a very fat and healthy, whatever you eat nourishes you, the water's not polluted, the air doesn't harm you, and you're fat and healthy and you don't get sick much. So they're the 4 karmic results of non-killing. Now flip those over. First, the result of killing would be an animal birth, an insect birth, even a hell birth, a spirit birth. The second, within this human, the second result of killing, and it could be in this human life, like I just said, you'd have a tendency to kill. Look at the human world. Most humans kill. It's considered a normal thing to do. That means we haven't lived in vows and we haven't purified that killing, so we keep on killing. Look at the third result. Look at the number of humans who die young or get sick or get killed, right? No, die young or get killed. Look, so many humans die young. So many humans get killed. Look at it, This lady here is dying before the full life is, well, she says she is. She might live all her life. She might live till she's 90, So that's the result of killing. And then the environmental result of killing would be you'd be unhealthy, always get sick, whatever you eat, the food, the world, the physical world itself harms you. So it's a simple example. So everything, as far as the Buddha is concerned, this is the law that runs the universe. He doesn't make it up. He's not a creator. He's not running it. There's no punishment. There's no reward. These are very simple concepts, but it's so different from how we think, you know. So all of our experiences, happy, sad, fruit of our past actions. Someone punches you in the nose, our past actions. Someone's kind to you, good thing. And we usually think of it in terms of good luck and bad luck, you know. No such concept in Buddhism. Everything is due to karma. It's a natural law that runs the universe. You with me? So the cause of death is, you know, we've got when you die and we don't have a warning. She's got a warning, you know, that she can make the most of her life, which is often the best way to think. Then you don't want to waste your life. You want to do the best with your life because you've got short time left. You know, that when you realize impermanence without being told you're sick, that's the real benefit. Then you can not use use your life in the best way. You understand? So clear, Eileen, that answers your question. So it's like we've got petrol in the tank and one day it'll run out. And sometimes with no warning, we can see that. Children die young, just overnight. People who are healthy die. Happy people die. Young people die. We know that. So we always assume it's somehow wrong. But this is the Buddha's view. So you can indeed put more petrol in your tank, have the nuns do the prayers, evoke the Buddhas, practice some more virtue. Because if you also live in vows of not killing, already just living in vows of not killing, you're purifying your killing karma. That can extend your life by doing virtuous actions and helping others. That can extend your life. It basically puts more gas in the tank. Do you understand? That's possible. Absolutely. That's all very much part of the Buddhist understanding.
Well,
Yes.
I mean, since you mentioned, I mean, it's you were told you're going to die, but it's interesting, right? What does that even mean? And I'm not.
What is what?
So she's told.
I know, but what's your question about that?
But what does it even mean to be told that we're going to die? Because it's stated as a fact. Of course, we're going to die. Whatever. That was.
Well, obviously you got sickness or something. Some sickness. Why are you surprised about that? What do you mean? I don't understand.
But the presumption is, again, living according to a particular expectation, projection around.
But we all have that, don't we? You've got to see.
But that's my point. We all.
What's your question?
She's not told this, and now you talked earlier about these neurotic tendencies. Again, then the fear drops in, which says, "Oh."
So what's your question, sweetheart? What's the question around that? What's the question?
Well, I was going to make the point around.
No, I want a question. It's good to have a question.
So.
What's the question? I can't see there's a question there. We all know we live in fear of death. We can see that we don't want to die. We always think it's an accident. We always think it's a mistake. We can see that. That proves we have these. No, that proves, sweetheart, that proves we have misconceptions in the mind, doesn't it? That proves it, doesn't it? And that's the ideal, is to not be afraid, to confront it and be aware of it and not be afraid of it. And therefore, best conclusion is then make the most of what you've got. Make the most of your life. That's the thing, isn't it? You see? That's good. So I'm sure I'm very rejoicing in her. And are you trying to make the most of your life, sweetheart? Are you trying to make the most of your life, darling, now that you know you're a dying person?
I have one day.
What's your view? But are you trying to make the most of your life while you're here? Do you have the view of karma, sweetheart?
Sorry?
Do you have the view of karma, the Buddhist view of karma? Is that your philosophy? I'm asking you if that's your view. I'm asking you, darling, if that's what kind of level are you at?
The Lama told me the same thing. He said you're no longer on the same level as people.
Oh, I see. So why are you here if you're on another level? I'm talking to ordinary people, not special people like you. Okay. I'm sorry to waste your time. Any other questions here, darling? Are there any other questions? Marilyn, happy to meet you, sweetheart. Happy to meet you, darling. Please ask your question.
I just have a few comments and then a question.
Yes, darling.
My worst fear was that my mom would die.
Yes.
And she
Yes.
didn't want to get upset, but
I understand. How are you dealing with it? How are you looking at it?
what's interesting is there was some that for me to visit her, before she passed.
Yes.
There was some complication.
Yes.
And I got to see her and spend 5 days.
Yes.
And just took care of her. And then the day after I left, she died.
Yes.
So I'm just listening to what other people are saying.
Yes. Yes.
And then my sister's taking care of her estate, and then a Buddhist nun bought her house.
Yes.
My mom wasn't connected to Buddhism.
Wow. Okay.
And so I took that as a good sign.
I understand, darling.
What was a good person?
I understand you.
Maybe she wasn't sophisticated enough.
No, of course not. Don't need to be. That's the most important. That's the most important point. That's right. She died well. You
did suffer and happened a lot quicker. She was 84.
And you spent time with her, and her mind was happy. Her mind was calm. Do you think?
I think in some ways, yes.
That's good.
In some ways,
right. I understand, darling.
Here's my question.
Yeah.
When we die, or when we're in nirvana, is that because when I think of who are we if we're not us, that was always my question.
What's
like when my mom dies, and who I will be? I will be a child.
That's right.
And that used to scare me.
I understand.
Now I feel it doesn't really matter.
I understand.
We are.
Yes. That's right.
You love me.
Yes. And you're becoming your best person.
Yeah.
And did you learn from this to try and make the most of your life and be ready for your own death? Did that occur to you? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
To get a sense of your own impermanence,
Yeah. I always think that, especially when I'm playing.
That's right, exactly. And you try to make the most of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main thing. That's the main thing, darling. So you pray for your mummy. That's good. That's good. Good, sweetheart. Good. Thank you so much. Thank you, darling. Who else? Absolutely, Marilyn. Yes.
Any control when we're going to die?
If you're an advanced practitioner, you definitely have control. And there are some things you can do if you're not an advanced practitioner, like you practice virtue, you live in vows of not killing, you pray to the Buddhas to help you, to support you. That's what you can do, darling.
Okay, because in my situation, for instance, I have been able to control.
That's wonderful. I'm very happy for you.
3 times.
Good. I'm very happy for you, darling. Thank you so much.
People would know that.
I understand.
I always thought it was not possible.
I understand. If you have, this is wonderful. I'm very happy for you. I'm very happy for you.
But it's not about being happy. It's about.
I am happy for you. You can make the most of now you can help other people. Now that you're living, you can help other people. You telling me your experience, I respect your experience, baby. Thank you so much. I think the biggest thing we can do, I mean, I'm saying, like 30 years ago, well, the same as 50 years ago, when I first met the Dharma, 50 years ago, I heard about this impermanence. It's kind of like, it's not surprising. We know things are changing. But when you make this in the front of your mind, I think, the real benefit for me of thinking about it is to see it for what it is, face it, and therefore conclude, even if you don't think you're going to be reincarnated. I mean, like my sister Julie, she's just this good, you make the most of your life. You feel satisfied that you've done something useful on this planet. That for me is tremendous. You know, if you can have a sense of impermanence and things changing and deal with it, accept it, face it as it's coming, and not be shocked by it, not live in denial of it, because that causes incredible fear, and then make the most of this time, do what we can to be of benefit to others. I think that's the biggest one, actually, you know. I mean, your little girl died, didn't she? How old was she? This weekend she died, didn't she? Not her daughter, a friend.
Yeah.
How old was she? 13. How was she? Tell us about her. She's a Muslim, wasn't she?
She was Catholic.
Oh, she was Catholic. Okay. And did she knew she was dying, this little girl?
Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, okay. And she'd faced it?
Leukemia.
How was she?
She was completely, she couldn't speak, she couldn't move.
Okay.
But her expression in her eyes, I could tell there was life by her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mostly painful for the family.
Yes, of course.
Mostly painful for the family, but for me, I felt like I experienced
my own death,
Mhm.
almost. When I experienced hers, it came real close to me.
Yes.
And I felt like it was a gift. In a way, because it moved me so much to inspire me to want to be working myself.
Exactly.
And
Yep. Exactly. Many people who work with, many people who do work with the dying say that. It's a very powerful experience. You know, you learn about somehow. I think it makes sense.
it felt like a learning experience.
I understand.
And I
Yeah.
brought another student that she was close to, I mentioned,
Yes.
and they had a real great exchange.
Right.
That helped her. I believe it helped her tremendously.
Yes.
To see someone else her own age
Yes.
communicate with her
I understand. Yeah.
that wasn't afraid.
That's interesting, isn't it? See, okay, so speaking from the Buddhist perspective, and that's the key point about why to help a person at the time of death, including your pet, you know. I mean, this is where you've got to have kind of confidence in the presence of the existence of Buddhas and all the holy beings. But I mean, even that's why they say when a person's dying, one of the common things is if they're in a coma, for example, think, oh, they can't hear anything. But the Buddhist view is to have it as peaceful as possible, even if they're in a coma, even if they're sleeping all the time, because that's when the mind is more subtle. The Buddhist view says when you stop breathing, you're not dead yet. That's just the gross consciousness. Your sensory consciousness has ceased. The heart has ceased. Your brain has stopped functioning. But the Buddhism talks about more subtle level of consciousness, which basically is your mental consciousness, which is the same type of consciousness we experience when we have dreams or we're in a coma. I remember hearing about one Italian man who was kept, alive by his mother. He was in a coma for 25 years, and he came out of his coma and he said he was conscious the whole time. So the Buddhist view is very strongly talking about a subtler level of consciousness. That's when you stop breathing, you're not dead yet. And that's why it's so important for your pet, for your loved ones, that ideally you leave them for at least 3 days, and you'd have many prayers done to help them, to help their mind, because to die with a peaceful mind is the main way to help a virtuous karmic seed be triggered at that time before they stop breathing, and then they're programmed ready to go to a next life. That's how they talk in Buddhism. That's the reason. So to make it very peaceful, so their minds can be virtuous, the fear can be subsided, they can die with a happy mind, which enables virtuous karmic seeds to be triggered, which enables them to leave their body after about 3 days and then ready for the new rebirth. But they've programmed themselves. That's how the Buddhism would talk, Go to your next human mother so you can carry on practicing. That'll do, I think. All right, people. Food for thought. Do whatever you can with it. If any of it's useful, fine. If not, I'm so sorry. Okay. Thank you, people. Jangchub Semchog Rinpoche, Ma Kie Panam Ke Guchig, Kie Panyam Pa Me Pa Yang, Gong Ne Gondu Pa Wa Shog, Gewa Di Nudu Dag, Lama Sange Drubgyo Ne, Droa Chikyang Malupa Dei Sala Gurpa Shog. And thank you for telling us your experience, Marianne. Very kind of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, sweethearts. See you next time. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, people on Zoom. Bye, everybody. See you, sweethearts.